Welcome to the Memphis Shelby County Coordinated Entry System Training with Community Alliance for the Homeless. On today's agenda, we have a lot to cover. We will start off with an overview of what HUD, the COC, and the CES is, HUD's Coordinated Entry Guiding Principles, your roles and responsibilities, the databases we use, the CES core elements, housing provider information, documentation, coordinated entry meetings, and coordinated entry resources. First, let's jump into an overview. The Continuum of Care, or COC, is a regional or local planning body that coordinates housing and services funded for homeless families and individuals. They primarily use funding received through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is known as HUD. CAF's core functions are 1. To operate a COC that provides technical assistance as well as planning and service coordination for the entirety of Memphis and Shelby County. 2. Operate and upkeep a homeless management information system known as HMIS, and 3. Design and implement a community-wide coordinated entry system known as CES. The coordinated entry system establishes a streamlined process for homeless services and housing providers in the Memphis-Shelby County geographic region to refer people experiencing homelessness to the COC program in the Emergency Solutions grant-funded programs. The CES uses an assessment tool to prioritize households experiencing literal homelessness and uses that prioritization to match households fairly and equitably with housing assistance and other mainstream resources. The CES creates and supports access points within Memphis-Shelby County where households that are literally homeless or at risk of homelessness can safely complete the appropriate housing needs assessment. Lastly, the CES purpose is to provide quick, fair, and equal access to anyone coming into the system, so that episodes of homelessness are rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. Let's now discuss the coordinated entry guiding principles that we follow per HUD. The CES principles produced by HUD are: first, fair access. This means all persons participating in any aspect of coordinated entry, such as access, assessment, prioritization, or match, shall be afforded equal access to CES services and resources, without regard to a person's actual or perceived membership in a federally protected class such as race, color, national origin, religion, sex, age, familial status, or disability. Next, we want to keep coordinated entry as low barrier as possible so that people experiencing homelessness seeking COC, CES are not discriminated against based on perceived barriers to housing. Barriers that are not considered or discriminated against when offering COC CES services include but are not limited to prior or ongoing substance use, domestic violence history, criminal justice involvement, physical, intellectual, and/or developmental disabilities, acute, long-term, and/or behavioral health conditions including serious mental illness, and history of evictions, poor credits, and/or housing lease violations. Moving on to the next principle, which is racial equity. The CES recognizes the historic and systematic racial disadvantages minority populations have faced in seeking housing in the United States. No protected class can be used as the sole basis for decisions on housing, but communities must take meaningful actions to overcome historic patterns of segregation, promote housing choice, and foster inclusive communities that are free from discrimination. An ongoing goal for the CES is to identify, address, and eliminate inequities and disparities that may present within the system to ensure that access to housing is as equitable as possible. To go along with racial equity, we also follow non-discrimination laws. This means that all participants within the CES will have equal access to all programs regardless of their race, color, age, religion, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, national origin, marital status, familial status, pregnancy, parenthood, creed, veteran status, veteran's disability, or physical or mental disability. Lastly, HUD adopted the Housing First approach. This is defined by the United States Interagency Council of Homelessness as a proven approach applicable across all elements of systems for ending homelessness, in which people experiencing homelessness are connected to permanent housing swiftly and with few to no treatment preconditions, behavioral contingencies, or other barriers. Housing First is an evidence-based practice designed to maximize housing stability for people experiencing homelessness. Housing First is most successful when supportive services are leveraged to prevent returns to homelessness. Therefore, utilizing a person-centered housing model helps move the households experiencing homelessness quickly and efficiently into housing, using the assumption that every eligible person is housing ready. Housing ready means that a person's eligibility for housing is not based on sobriety treatment, compliance, or criminal histories. Rather, people experiencing homelessness can control their own outcomes and improve their quality of life after they have attained housing. Here's a graphic that shows the Housing First method. As you can see, if people who need housing must reach sobriety, gain employment, or even be mandated to participate in a program before being housed, it only pushes being housed back. We want to eliminate these barriers and believe once they have that housing stability, they can focus and achieve other things. Now let's get into the CES contributors' roles and responsibilities. If you're watching this training, this is you. You are the contributor. CES Access Points. Access Points refers to agencies or contacts trained in HMIS and CES, enabling them to enter individuals who report homelessness, as defined by HUD, into coordinated entry through the HMIS system. This can be the individual's first contact when in a housing crisis. These access points engage them and refer them to emergency services to address all immediate needs. The non-HMIS CES community partners refers to providers or agencies that are trained in CES but do not have access to HMIS. These partners advocate for individuals in need, assist with connecting individuals to resources, and help address gaps in documentation and service linkage, despite not being able to directly enter individuals. Next is the COC housing providers and case managers. The COC housing providers must actively participate in the coordinated entry system by accepting matches from the CES matchmaker and reporting all unit vacancies, move-in statuses, and consumer progress. Regular communication with the CES facilitator is crucial for preventing evictions and addressing rehousing needs promptly. Housing providers are responsible for offering comprehensive support and linking consumers to community resources while adhering to funding regulations and reporting requirements using HMIS. All housing providers must adhere to the Housing First protocol as outlined by HUD and the Housing First Permanent Supportive Housing Brief. This is the Coordinated Entry System Confidentiality Agreement forms. Please make sure to read and sign these forms which will be available on the CAF website under Partner Portal, Coordinated Entry, and then click Forms. This is a must because at coordinated entry meetings, we're discussing protected HIPAA information and we want to keep our clients' information as safe as possible. Next, we will discuss the CES databases. The CES databases include HMIS and comparable databases. HMIS is required to collect all data per HUD as it relates to the CES in managing project enrollment, exit information, assessments, which include the Housing Needs Assessment, HUD-required reporting elements, prioritization, and any necessary case management services that support the goal of a household's move into permanent housing. Comparable databases is for victim service providers. They are prohibited from entering data into the HMIS and will be required to use a comparable database to participate in coordinated entry. A comparable database is a relational database that meets all HMIS data standards and does so in a method that protects the safety and privacy of survivors. Not everyone who has access to HMIS has access to the comparable database. Now let's get into the CES core elements. HUD core elements that are required by all coordinated entry processes are access, assessment, prioritization, and matches. First needed is the establishment of access points and then the use of a standardized assessment to gather information on people's needs, along with preferences and barriers they face to gain housing. The COC then follows established policies and procedures to prioritize households to then match them into a housing program and supportive services. On the next few slides, we will discuss these elements more in depth. Like was previously mentioned, access is the first core element. This refers to how people experiencing a housing crisis learn that coordinated entry exists and access crisis response services. The first contact that most people will have with the crisis response system is through a coordinated entry access point. Access points play a critical role in engaging people to address their most immediate needs. Here is a decision tree that will help you decide if someone should be placed into coordinated entry. Take a moment and look over it. All the forms shown will be available on the CAF website under Partner Portal, and then click on Coordinated Entry. And then here is a table that describes the categories of homelessness as defined by HUD. This is what HUD uses to determine who gets put in coordinated entry. We primarily work with clients who are in the first, second, and fourth categories. The Memphis Shelby County Coordinated Entry System utilizes a decentralized access referred to as a no wrong door approach. A no wrong door approach helps limit barriers to coordinated entry access. Persons experiencing homelessness can access the coordinated entry at any agency regardless of the population of the participant. This means that the coordinated entry partnered agencies are equipped to enter individuals, youth, and families. This does not mean that you're providing services outside of the scope of your agencies. CES is not asking you to enroll them in services you cannot or do not provide. In this case, if your agencies are unable to serve them outside of coordinated entry, then pointing them in the right direction would be your next step. Moving on to the next core element, which is assessment. The assessment is the process of gathering information about a person presenting to the crisis response system. Assessment includes documenting information about the barriers the person faces to being rapidly housed and any characteristics that might make them more vulnerable while homeless. CES uses a phased assessment to capture all necessary information and limit how frequently the person being assessed must repeat their personal story. This is done to ensure our community practices are trauma-informed. The validity of the process relies on those completing the phased assessments to utilize the CES questionnaire as a conversation to better understand the person's circumstances as it relates to their homelessness. The information in the questionnaire is essential to move forward. However, CES recognizes no assessment paints an accurate picture of a human and their circumstances. Many families' questionnaires are identical, but their circumstances surrounding their unhoused status differ. Without doing our collective best to understand the circumstances, patterns, and gaps in our community, we are just gathering information without considering the participants are human beings. They should be met with a trauma-informed soft touch. The first phase of the assessment is under 10 questions and gathers basic information to help see what housing programs the person is eligible for. This eliminates asking lengthy, intrusive questions during initial meeting. The first assessment for individuals and youth are only different in the fact that for youth aged 18 to 24 years old, the questions are more specific. Here's what the CES questionnaire looks like. And this is the YHDP assessment, otherwise known as the youth assessment. The second phase is the vulnerability assessment. It's composed of 17 questions and can score up to 21 points. The areas being asked about are substance use, legal issues, mental health, physical health and wellness, medication management, self-care, daily living activities, experience of abuse or trauma, and risk of harm to self or others. Here's the MVA, otherwise known as the Memphis Vulnerability Assessment, and it's now being used in place of the VI. Now, when and who do you give the second phase assessment to? Once you complete the questionnaire, you immediately move on to the second phase if your client is a veteran, pregnant, single parent with 3+ dependents under the age of 6, have dependents with a documented disability, or they're fleeing from DV, IPV, or trafficking. They also must meet their ADLs. If your client does not meet these criteria, do not complete the second assessment. And then here is a decision tree on how to determine when to administer the MVA. If your client doesn't receive the second phase, they will still be in coordinated entry. They will populate on the coordinated entry questionnaire report, and we will be reviewed in the by name list meetings. The next core element is prioritization. The coordinated entry system determines the individual's priority for housing and supportive services through assessing and analyzing the COC's prioritization standards against the assessment that was given. Prioritization for permanent supportive housing, otherwise known as PSH, is as follows. First priority is given to those who are chronically homeless with the longest history and the most severe service needs. Second priority is those who are chronically homeless with the longest history but without those severe service needs. Third priority is chronically homeless and have the most severe service needs. Fourth priority is all other chronically homeless individuals or families that are not included in priorities 1 through 3. The last priority are the individuals or families that are not chronically homeless but have a disability and severe service needs. Prioritization for rapid rehousing, otherwise known as RRH, for individuals are as follows. If they are experiencing domestic violence and other safety concerns, the length of time homeless, and their deteriorating or potentially deteriorating health. Prioritization for RRH for families include households who are experiencing domestic violence, pregnant members of the family, length of time homeless, single parent with 3 or more dependent children under the age of 6, and a child with a documented disability. Prioritization for rapid rehousing for youth experiencing or at risk of domestic violence, vulnerability to illness or death, high utilization of crisis or emergency services, including emergency rooms, jails, and psychiatric facilities to meet basic needs and the risk of continued homelessness. If 2 households have the same prioritization score, the tiebreakers for that would be veteran status, longest length of homelessness, and lowest household income. These are used to determine who receives priority. The last element is matchmaking. This is based on the person's priority level, with suggested housing and supportive service options. The participant then makes the final decision on which program to enroll in. HUD refers to matchmaking as referrals, but within our community, we found that using the word matchmaking made the process less confusing. CES facilitators match housing openings to clients both in and outside CES meetings, with client discussions at the by name list meetings to ensure low barrier eligibility requirements for COC-funded housing programs. The CES uses housing first principles, prioritizing those who meet minimal eligibility requirements for RRH or PSH. Matchmaking relies on CES prioritization practices and active CES meeting participation. Once a match is made, a collaborative, warm handoff is scheduled between the housing provider and the outreach service providers to ensure clear communication and a seamless transition. The CES team will match eligible clients to available COC housing programs within 3 business days of the reported vacancy. The next section we will be talking about is COC housing providers. There are 3 housing types we primarily work with. One is permanent supportive housing, which, like the name says, is permanent and does not have an end date. To be qualified, the household must include 1 member with a disability. Supportive services are available for the entire duration of the participant's stay. Rapid rehousing is a short-term solution with assistance for 3 months up to 24 months. This is tenant-based rental assistance along with supportive services. Unlike PSH and rapid rehousing, there is no requirement that any member of the household needs to have a disability. Supportive services may continue for up to 6 months after rental assistance ends. Transitional housing is the last housing type, and this is temporary housing with supportive services with the goal of transitioning households into permanent housing within 24 months. PSH eligibility requirements. PSH can only assist individuals with disabilities and families in which 1 adult or child has a disability. Disability is defined as having 1 or more physical, mental, or emotional impairment, developmental disability, and/or HIV/AIDS. Once a participant's disability is documented, this status does not need to be recertified after intake. Chronically homeless is defined as someone who lives in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven or an emergency shelter, and has been homeless in such a state for at least 1 year, either continuously or at least 4 separate occasions in the last 3 years, and can be diagnosed with 1 or more of the following conditions: substance use disorder, serious mental illness, developmental disability, PTSD, cognitive impairments resulting from a brain injury, or chronic physical illness or disability. PSH participants are required to pay 30% of their income to the PSH project. Failure to do so will result in a lease violation. Rapid rehousing eligibility is more lenient. An individual does not have to have a disability, and generally the individual or household must meet the definition of homelessness in the COC program interim rule under Category 1 or 4. Rapid rehousing provides short-term to medium-term tenant-based rental assistance along with supportive services. Participants are required to meet with a case manager at least once a month, with flexibility in how and where these services are delivered, whether at the participant's home, an office, another location, or even by phone. Rapid rehousing participants are evaluated at least once a year to ensure that continued RRH assistance is necessary, specifically to verify that participants still lack the resources and support networks needed to maintain housing without the assistance. Tenants pay a share of the monthly rent that gradually increases as their income increases. At the end of the RRH assistance, the tenancy continues according to the term of the initial lease, and the household is responsible for the monthly rent to the landlord. CEC housing providers all provide supportive services. They provide a wide array of services. Take a moment to look through them. Vacancies. All COC, YHDP, and ESG housing providers must enroll new participants exclusively through the COC's coordinated entry referral process. To ensure prompt referrals and minimize vacancy rates, providers are required to notify the coordinated entry facilitator of any current or anticipated vacancies within 14 business days of becoming aware of them. They report vacancies to the CES team by entering it in an open units report in HMIS. The notification must include specific details such as the project name, unit size, location, and any funder-defined eligibility requirements. You are able to report openings as early as you want, and it will not affect your APR. The APR only looks at the bed utilization. With that being said, if you know you will have a unit available in a month, go ahead and put that opening in. If you need assistance navigating this in HMIS, please email the help desk at helpdesk@caf.org. If the client population changes after matchmaking, so this is when a housing provider receives the match and the housing provider's targeted population does not match or is no longer matched to the population primarily served by the housing provider. These are the steps to be followed. 1, you need to immediately contact the coordinated entry facilitator to discuss the population change or the population appropriateness. The CES facilitator will then seek clarification through direct contact and HMIS history to clarify and ensure the match is appropriate to the population of the housing program and clients being matched. No housing program can deny a match when the population does not match their targeted housing program without the direct contact and communication with the coordinated entry facilitator to ensure the timeliness and appropriateness of the client's needs. CES housing matches cannot be denied or canceled without communications with the coordinated entry facilitator. Coordinated entry housing providers can only deny a match for the below reasons: eligibility issues, client refusal of the housing and services being offered, safety concerns, and inability to locate client. In the next slide, we will dive deeper into these reasons. If a provider needs to deny or cancel a match, the agency must notify the coordinated entry facilitator of the refusal before any action is taken in HMIS. If there are eligibility issues, agencies may cancel a match if the individual is not eligible for the program services, has been incorrectly matched, or is banned from the program. The agency must document the reason for canceling or declining the match in HMIS with a note explaining the decision. Client refusal: if an eligible individual refuses the assigned placement, the agency may decline the match in HMIS, marking the reason as client refused services. Inability to locate the client: if the referred individual cannot be located within 5 business days of the initial match, and only if there are other eligible clients ready for placement, the coordinated entry facilitator may cancel the match. The individual who cannot be located will remain in the coordinated queue, and the available unit will be matched to the next ready client. CES should aim to place clients quickly and avoid holding units for extended periods. Safety concerns. Refusals are acceptable if the individual poses a danger to themselves or others if placed in the project, or the services offered by the project are insufficient to meet the participant's needs. Sometimes a participant requests or requires a housing transfer. When this happens, an internal transfer application must be completed on their behalf by the current housing provider. The housing provider will case conference with the coordinated entry facilitator to begin the transfer process. When a participant in a COC housing program requests or requires an internal transfer, the following steps must be followed. 1. Completion of internal transfer application. The current housing provider must complete the internal transfer application on behalf of the participant. 2. Case conferencing. The housing provider will engage in a case conference with the CES facilitator to discuss the participant's transfer needs. 3. Alternative COC housing program transfer. If a transfer to a different COC housing program is necessary, the housing provider will fill out the COC housing program internal transfer form. 4. Review and documentation. The CES facilitator will review the completed form and upload it into the HMIS system. And 5. Assignment to available unit. The CES facilitator will match the participant to the next appropriate available unit that meets the participant's requests and needs. Here's what the transfer request form looks like. And then this form is for the clients who are transferring between rapid rehousing to PSH. Rehousing coordinated entry clients. The general rehousing policy states that individuals may be rehoused within the same program multiple times as long as the program is willing to accommodate them. Additionally, a client can be rehoused in up to 3 separate housing programs before they must exit and restart the coordinated entry process. This decision will take into consideration any other resources needed to help the client succeed and is contingent upon the program's acceptance of the match. Certain situations may necessitate an immediate move from one housing unit or program to another. The criteria for immediate rehousing is if a client is fleeing domestic violence, making their current housing unit unsafe, clients experiencing domestic violence while in COC-funded housing are protected by VAWA regulations and cannot be terminated due to the violence, a client that requires more intensive support or case management services, such as programs with more intensive mental or behavioral health services. In these situations, clients will be moved back to the top of the by name list and prioritized for the next available appropriate housing openings. Programs must communicate with the coordinated entry facilitator to ensure that clients' immediate rehousing situations are efficiently prioritized and relocated as quickly as possible. There are some clients that have non-immediate rehousing situations. These can include a client's request. They may request a desire to move to a different housing unit or program, or they may violate their lease agreements. Lease violations do not automatically disqualify clients from being rehoused, nor do they necessitate eviction from the program. Rehousing due to client preference. If a client wishes to leave their unit of their own accord and there is no significant issues with their current housing, they are not eligible for expedited rehousing. The client has the right to exit and be placed back on the by name list using the documentation provided during the original coordinated entry match. This information will guide future placements. Rehousing due to lease violations. If a client frequently or severely violates their lease, including non-payment of rent, they may be evicted from the program. In such cases, the client may be rehoused through coordinated entry but will not be prioritized. Clients may be rehoused within the same program if the program agrees or be offered alternative housing or community resources. Rehousing due to violence. If a client is evicted due to violent behavior, they are not eligible for expedited priority rehousing. The client will be placed back on the by name list using the original coordinated entry documentation. unless a new assessment is warranted due to changes in the client's vulnerability or homeless status. This information will be used in future placements. We never want to evict someone without trying all means of helping and assisting the client. It's important to note that just because a client has a lease violation, that does not automatically mean that a client must be evicted. Programs should uphold every strategy possible to work with a client to understand why violations may be occurring and create a plan to help link clients with additional resources or services that can help and address any unmet needs. Before an eviction, programs should contact the coordinated entry facilitator for additional resources or support. With the issue of non-payment, programs should use an internal protocol to address this issue, including verbal warnings, a housing retention agreement, and contracts signed by the client. Case notes and supportive documentation of scheduled client meetings regarding the issue and who is in attendance, and any progress surrounding income, budgeting, payee setup, etc. If a client commits a criminal offense on the property in which they reside, or the crime has an immediate connection to the property or other residents on the property, they may be eligible for immediate eviction without case management attempts at mediation. If a client becomes violent with the program staff or another tenant, the safety of all involved should be the highest priority. A behavioral improvement plan and action steps to prevent an occurrence from happening again, an internal incident report, supportive documentation, and policies around behavior expectations should be included. If a client willingly walks away from their unit, lets the housing program know they aren't coming back, or hasn't been seen or heard from for more than 30 days, they are eligible for program eviction as a matter of abandonment. Hospitalization and or incarceration of more than 90 days, they are required to be terminated from the program per HUD regulations. If the program knows that their client is hospitalized or incarcerated, it is not considered abandonment. In this instance, 90 days must pass before the client is eligible to be evicted versus the 30-day abandonment rule mentioned above. Anytime a PSH program termination is being considered, it is required that the housing program communicates any issues with the coordinated entry facilitator in case conference and weekly meeting to tackle barriers and find solutions. Rapid rehousing rental assistance payments can only be made for units that pass the Department of Housing and Urban Development housing quality standards within 30 days of the initial and annual inspection. Failure to comply with the federal regulations of the program result in termination from the program. Per the federal regulations, clients must receive an annual assessment of needs and provide all required documentation to verify program eligibility initially and as changes occur. Termination will also occur if the qualifying member of the household is institutionalized or incarcerated for more than 90 days, moves out of the service area, voluntarily exits the program, or becomes deceased. This form is to be completed to terminate a client from a housing program. Now let's move on to the documentation portion. Participants in the CES must provide specific documentation to verify their eligibility per HUD. The two main documentations required are the verification of homelessness and verification of disability. A VOH can be one documented encounter, physical observation of living situation, or HMIS record indicating homelessness within a month is sufficient to verify homelessness for the entire calendar month, if there is no other evidence indicating a break in homelessness for that month. A VOD can be a form that confirms a person has a physical, mental, or emotional impairment that makes it difficult for them to live independently. A health provider can sign the form, which is only valid for housing purposes and not for obtaining disability benefits. VOH can be from a third party in the form of an HMIS printout, written referral or certification by another housing or service provider, or a written letter of observation with specific dates by an outreach worker, service provider, licensed professional, law enforcement, agency or organization, business owner, and relatives do not count. Or the letter of verification written by an applicable emergency shelter. Or self-certification by the individual or head of household seeking assistance stating that they were living on the streets or in shelter. If a self-certification is done, they can only self-certify for 3 months. BOH documentation to demonstrate chronic homelessness includes the due diligence must be documented to ensure that every attempt to obtain third-party documentation was made. Chronic VOHs must total 12 months in literal homelessness. Documentation can be 12 months consecutively or 4 separate instances over the last 3 years, totaling 12 months. This is verification of homelessness from a shelter, program, or facility. Again, 1 day in a month can be certified for that whole month. Here's a verification of homelessness, unsheltered, third party. So this would be if you have witnessed or the client is telling you that they are literally homeless. And then this is the self-certification. Again, clients can only identify up to 3 months, and only this should be used for PSH. It can be used for rapid rehousing, but it will not be prioritized along with others who have other forms of verification of homelessness. Here is an acceptable VOH letter. It must be on a letterhead, it must be typed, and it must be signed. It also must include specific dates. Here's an unacceptable verification of homelessness letter. The letter must mention the month and year to contribute to the accumulation of 12 months in the last 3 years. Letters that state month and year, that counts as 1 month. Letters that state month, year, 2 month, year only account for the 2 months mentioned. Verification of disability forms. This is only needed for PSH. They can be the HUD form called disability verification, signed by a licensed medical professional or physician, a current copy of the individual's check stub statement showing Social Security records, currently receiving SSI or SSDI benefits. BOD is only required to obtain if the individual requires permanent supportive housing through CES. VODs do not expire. Here's the form for verification of disability for permanent supportive housing. And then here are the record keeping categories per HUD. Supportive documentation for each housing type. Rapid rehousing, your client must be able to obtain a lease and MLGW in their name. PSH does not require this, but it's always good to help guide them to places that can help them obtain these documents. Income verification is not a requirement for enrollment. However, for RRH, it can help with the leasing process. And for PSH, the tenant must contribute 30% of their income towards rent. Now let's discuss the different CES meetings. The CES by name list meetings are routine meetings held for each population designated by HUD. These meetings occur separately but are all parallel in purpose and process. CES meetings are used to review the by name list, provide opportunities to case conference with community partners from different agencies, resource share, and match CES participants with housing quickly, efficiently, and equitably. The Housing Case Manager staffing has population-specific meetings to case conference and provide support to COC housing providers who have clients matched to their programs. All matches are reviewed and discussed, identifying any barriers to housing and sustaining housing inside the housing program. The intention of these meetings is to provide support and technical assistance to housing providers, so they meet the needs of the CES participants to help them thrive within the CES. The 2 meeting groups that were just mentioned are client-level meetings. Here's a more in-depth breakdown of who should attend and who facilitates these meetings. The by name list meetings are extremely important because this is where you as a CES contributor can advocate for your clients. The Housing Case Manager meetings are for the COC, ESG, and YHDP case managers. Here you review client matches and address any barriers to getting these clients moved into housing. Property Partners and Housing Support Social. These will be held on a less than quarterly basis. The purpose of this event is to facilitate networking and collaboration between our partnered providers and partnered landlords and property owners. In addition to networking, the event will provide opportunities for providers to engage with landlords and property owners through a structured Q&A session. Additionally, there will be opportunities for special guests with expertise in affordable housing to appear, offering valuable insights that could benefit both partnered providers and landlords, property owners. The Housing Huddle is held quarterly. The goal of the roundtable is to bring together all our partnered housing providers to discuss affordable housing. Topics can include areas of need, best practices, new opportunities, challenges faced, collaborative solutions. This forum aims to foster open communication, share valuable insights, and strengthen partnerships, ultimately enhancing our collective efforts to provide affordable housing. Outreach committee meetings are to bring together housing providers and outreach workers participating in the coordinated entry system for the purpose of case conferencing, resource sharing, and advocating for resources and services for those experiencing homelessness. The CES does not schedule any other CES meetings during the week of the outreach committee to encourage attendance from all CES contributors. The last 3 meetings mentioned are provider-level meetings. Let's break them down a little more. The Property Partners and Housing Support Social are for housing providers, housing case managers, direct service providers, and this is a networking opportunity and collaboration between these 3 groups of workers. The Housing Huddle are for just the housing provider managers, and this is to discuss opportunities, challenges, and solutions aiming to enhance partnerships. The Outreach Committee meetings are for all the coordinated entry contributors. There are no other meetings scheduled during this week to encourage everyone to attend. Here's where we resource share, advocate for resources, and advocate for services for those experiencing homelessness. This is our monthly calendar meeting. It is on top of every meeting email that you receive. As you can see, there are no meetings on the first full week of the month. We always start our meetings on the second full week of the month. And the third full week of the month is dedicated just to that community or outreach meeting. Again, this is on every email that you receive from the coordinated entry. Next is checklists that can be helpful when putting clients into coordinated entry. This is the coordinated entry checklist for adults 24 years and older. All these forms can be found on our website, caf.org, partner portal, coordinated entry, and then forms. This checklist is for youth 18 to 24. Here's some miscellaneous information to wrap it up. Re-enrolling clients back into coordinated entry after they auto-exit or timeout. So in HMIS, your client will be auto-exited after 90 days of inactivity. If someone you are still working with is still engaged, or you are actively trying to engage with them, you can re-enroll them into CES without creating a new enrollment. To do this, you go into your client's profile, go to Programs, find the Coordinated Entry Enrollment, and click on that. Once you are inside their enrollment, hit the Exit, scroll down, and it should say Reopen Client Program. Click on this and follow the steps. If you have any questions, please email the help desk at helpdesk@caf.org. There are multiple places you can locate a client's contact information. You can find it on the profile page, in the CES questionnaire, and in the notes portion. When you are in need of making contact with a client and have not been successful, you can put a public alert on their HMIS profile. This will alert anyone who pulls their profile up with this orange bar. To do this, go into Notes, and at the bottom it will say Public Alerts. Notes, and then Public Alerts. You should be receiving our coordinated entry emails, which are being sent through MailChimp. The by name list emails are sent out twice a month, and the housing team emails are sent out once a month. Finally, to wrap up this training, here's all of the coordinated entry contact information, along with what area we all work in. If you have any further questions regarding this training or the quiz, you can reach out to me at pamela@caf.org. If you have specific HMIS system questions, please reach out to Emmett at helpdesk@caf.org. And once this training has been completed, please go ahead and take the quiz. The link is located on the website underneath this video.